Morning, everyone, and this certainly is the highlight of my career. I'll put it out there just now. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and paying my respects to their elders past, present and future. And thank you to the organisers for inviting me to speak today. Serendipitously, I walked into the room just as Kate was talking about politicians. And I resisted turning around and walking out again. It made me think about what I always say about the role of being a member of parliament, because politics is so new to me. I was only elected last year, and before that was very, very cynical about politics, hadn't even thought of a career in politics. And I think some of you in the room may even remember me saying on national television that all politicians are liars, which I had to answer for when I actually ran for the federal elections. But really, if I was to look at the role of a member of parliament, there are three aspects to being a member of parliament. This is what I've learned in my journey thus far, my journey of a year and a bit. One of those roles is to be the politician, which I'm not very good at. I don't like adversarial politics. I don't like politics. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And in many ways, I don't want to get it and I don't want to understand it. So I'm trying to forge a way as a member of parliament that doesn't get involved in that. I'll let you know how successful I am in doing that in maybe a couple of years. But the other two roles are what are really important to me. There's your role as a politician, there's your role as a parliamentarian, which is kind of like the machinery of policy making. You know, it involves being on committees in parliament, speaking up in parliament, partaking in debates, and those kinds of things. And I kind of enjoy that because I've got a policy background. But the role that I most enjoy is the role of being a part and a voice of your community, because that takes me back to my roots. I've had a very varied career. I've been a teacher, a policymaker, an academic, and now a member of parliament. But the thread that runs constant through all of those is that I always had an involvement in community organisations. As a director of a community organisation, and later starting up my own community-based not-for-profit organisation called PAVE, which worked predominantly with young people and worked in the counter-radicalisation, countering violent extremism phase. So I like to think that I have a healthier respect for the community sector and understand the value of the community sector. And even before I entered Parliament, a lot of what I was advocating for was that we should be promoting a strong and robust civil society sector in order to promote those things that contribute to community well-being, social well-being, and the societal health of a nation. Often that fell on dead ears. Which is one of the reasons why in 2015, at the height of my career, having been to the White House, having worked with the United Nations, having been invited to world forums, and having achieved the status of a professor, I decided to leave all of that and enter politics. And I hope that in this position, as a federal member of parliament, but predominantly in my role as a community person and a community advocate, I can make some difference in raising awareness of just how important it is to have a strong and robust and well-funded community sector, and one that we value. One that we value not just in monetary terms, in terms of the funding that we give to it, but that we value in terms of understanding and fully committing to the unmeasurable, right, in terms of numbers and money, the immeasurable benefits that the community sector brings to societal well-being. So this morning, yeah, I get asked to speak on a whole range of things. I used to only get asked to talk about terrorism, but it's great because I get asked to talk about a whole range of things now, and I enjoy it because it's an opportunity for self-reflection for me when I'm preparing to speak at a conference such as this. So this morning I was really self-reflecting about what is community. What is community, and what does community mean, and what is social cohesion, and what is belonging? And I can speak to you academically about it because I've spoken academically about it for many, many years, about the importance of social cohesion and the importance of community. But I don't just want to do that today. I want to speak to you personally about it. I want to share with you my own experiences of social inclusion and belonging, because they are very personal experiences. They are personal experiences for all of us here. And I think that if we can draw on our personal experiences, if we can reflect on our personal experiences, it really adds value to what we do going forward, and hopefully what we can do moving forward from this conference as well. So I start with the question today of what's this all about and why am I here? And I have a little bit of a confession to make, and that confession is that most of the time when I speak, I don't leave you with answers. I probably leave you with more questions than answers. But I've learned that that's okay, because reframing a problem and asking new questions about a problem is a great springboard for moving forward, for starting to examine solutions and resolutions to the problem from different perspectives. So I'm okay with leaving you with a lot of questions and no answers. You might not be, but we'll see how we go. Okay. So I wanted to cover off on a few things today. Social cohesion, what does that mean? We often hear it thrown around a lot, particularly by politicians, but we also hear politicians throw around a lot of words that they don't understand, like innovation and agile and a whole range of things. But what does it really mean? What does social cohesion look like? And why does it break down? And what happens when it breaks down? Because that's a space that I've worked in for the last 2 decades, was working in spaces where social cohesion had broken down, and with people who had lost that sense of social cohesion, that sense of community, and that sense of belonging. So I want to touch on and share with you what happens when social cohesion breaks down. What does that mean to be a part of a community? I mean, that's a really that's a question that you can take kind of from this kind of broader policy level, I guess, but also from a personal level as well. Like, what does it mean to have a Department of Communities? What does the Department of Communities actually do? And when community can be such a personal thing and belonging can be such a personal thing, where do those two kind of meet? And how do we use that synergy? How do we tap into that to move forward and to promote what we do? And where do I belong? And okay, thanks for that. Okay, so now I have a lot of questions. So that'll probably be the format of today. So I wanted to start off with the dictionary definition of social cohesion. A lot of long words there. Social cohesion, interrelatedness and unity between individuals, groups, and organisations in society. But if we really break it down into what it takes for social cohesion, we're really talking about willingness to cooperate, and that's often something that's left out, the willingness of individuals and groups to cooperate with each other, but also with the institutions that govern them, right? We're talking about civic participation. And there's been a lot of talk lately about citizenship and values and all of that. But what we miss when in that discussion is participation, which is where you guys all come in, right? Because you facilitate participation for individuals in our society, and you differentiate between that kind of that formal citizenship and participatory citizenship, which means that people are able to contribute to society through the kinds of services and through the kinds of programs that you provide. You give them a way of participating civilly in all forms of social life. And inclusivity, and I really want to explore inclusivity a little bit more when I talk about belonging, and that's where we're going to get a little bit personal as well. So that's the kind of dictionary definition of social cohesion, but I really prefer the OECD definition of a socially cohesive society, because they look at 3 values and they define a socially cohesive society as having 3 key ingredients. And the first one is social inclusion. Okay, and that's what's missing. This is really what's missing from the old one, because here, the one that I just showed you, because here social inclusion, according to the OECD, is the degree to which all citizens can participate. So it brings in that enabling factor, that opportunity factor, that capacity factor, okay, which is what the community sector does. It develops the capacity, it facilitates the capacity, it enables citizens to participate on equal footing in economic, social and political life, and including whether people are protected in times of need. The other aspect is social capital. Refers to the trust between people and in institutions, and here we go, the sense of belonging to a society, the sense of belonging to a society. And mobility, the equality of opportunity to get ahead. Okay. So just in this definition of a cohesive society by the OECD, we have all the themes that we're talking about here today. We have community, we have belonging, we have inclusion. And importantly, there's a recognition about opportunity and the enabling of opportunity, because that is where the real value of community organisations lies, in enabling opportunity, enabling civic participation, enabling belonging, and contributing to social cohesion through that enabling. Right, so let's get personal. Yeah, enough of that academic boring stuff. What's a community? I was thinking about that this morning as I was having my coffee. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to talk about community. What am I going to talk about? Because what's a community, right? I'm talking to myself. Lucky my husband wasn't there, because he would have pulled me up on it. But I was standing there having my coffee and talking to myself and going, so Anne, what do you think community is? Right? Because community can be intensely personal. Yeah, you can have, like, I go to work at Parliament House and I'm there in a community, but do I feel a sense of belonging to that community? Often I feel like a bit of an outsider, especially in Parliament House, especially when I'm walking through the corridors and there are all these paintings of old men staring at me going, hey, what are you doing here? So yeah, is that a community? In a sense, it is. It is a community. It is a part of a community that I'm in. In my own neighbourhood, there's a sense of community. I work a lot with schools in my area, and I feel a sense of community there. I work a lot with community organisations, and that's a different kind of sense of community as well. But what I really want to talk about here is how we define community. And I want to differentiate between subjective and objective. Subjective and objective, okay? Because, and really, a social group versus a social grouping, okay? Because I want you to do this. I want you to take a look at me for a minute. Thank you. Say that again. And here's the thing. Growing up, I was often subjected to assumptions about what my social grouping was. I was often subjected to assumptions that because of this, I must be part of that. Because of this, I must be part of that community. But that was an objective definition of my community. It wasn't something that I chose. It wasn't something that I necessarily belonged to. It wasn't something that I picked as a social group. It was a social grouping that I was positioned in because of this, because of how I looked, because of my demographic, first generation, migrant, Arab background, Muslim upbringing. And I'll share with you a story. When I was 26, I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was in an abusive relationship. And one night, sitting there waiting for my abusive husband to come home, holding 2 sick children on my lap, and I couldn't move because they both had flu and fever, and I had a flu and a fever, and so I was sitting there on the chair in the living room, and that was the day that I decided I was going to leave my husband. And I remember crying into my sons, to my 2 babies, and crying so much that their hair had turned wet with my tears, and saying to them, I'm sorry, over and over again. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry that I'm not strong enough to stay in this relationship for you. I'm sorry that I have to leave your father. I'm sorry that you're going to be raised without a father. I'm sorry that I'm breaking up your home. When I went to seek help to leave my husband, I was told to go and visit the Muslim Women's Support Centre because I'm from that community. They should be able to help you. That's your community. Go visit them. So I went there. And when I went there, because every other avenue that I went to pointed me into that direction because of an assumption of my social grouping, because of an assumption that that was my community. Okay. I remember going to a judge, this was a long time ago, and I do hope that things have changed, to get a violence restraining order against my husband the first time he hit me. And he looked at my mother, who wears the headscarf, and said, you should be used to this. Do you really want us to come in? Do you really want the police to come in and drag your husband out in front of your son? You know, surely your culture can help you deal with that. Okay? So I went to the Muslim Women's Support Centre, and the advice that I got from them was pretty much the same as what the advice that this judge had given me, and that my mother had given me time and time again. Be patient. Stay with your husband. What are you going to do without a man? Isn't it better to have a man around? After all, Arab women, you know, we're not meant for the sun. So, and that had a devastating impact on me. I mean, you know, I'm very grateful that I have a sense of resilience and strength that allowed me to move through that. But for a lot of women, they don't have that. And so for a lot of women, what happens is that when we subjectify their social grouping, okay, when we assume that they belong to a community because of their demographics, their background, how they look, where they've come from, what language they speak, what religion they are, a whole range of things, both women and men, we're not giving them the agency that we're supposed to be giving them. We're not giving them that capacity that we're supposed to be giving them to participate fully in society. So we need to be asking what we mean by community, but allowing people to tell us what they mean by a sense of belonging, what they mean by community, which community or communities they feel a part of. And rather than it being about a social social groupings and imposing social groupings on people talk about social groups and the social groups that people choose to be a part of and that they feel comfortable with and that they belong to, that they choose to belong to. So there's a barrier to this. And the barrier to that is human nature. Okay? It is human nature to group with the people that you feel you have the most in common with and to differentiate yourself from the people that you feel you have the least in common with, right? Human nature. We do it all the time, you know. I don't hang around Corey Bernardi or Pauline Hanson very much, right? Even though I might try to find common ground with them, you know, there are a lot of differences there. It's not like we're drinking tea and having scones every afternoon. It's part of human nature. You gravitate to those people who you feel share the same values, look like you, act like you, have the same interests as you. So I want to do a little bit of an exercise with you around that, because I want to then move into what does that do and how do we overcome that and how does that create barriers for us in truly being inclusive and truly being capacity builders for belonging. So I want you to have I'm going to show you some photos, right? And I just want you to turn to each other. I want you just by looking at these photos, just think about, okay, are these people more like me or less like me? More like me or less like me? And why? More like you or less like you? That'd be me. I'm not a good swimmer. Okay, so that's the first picture. So you probably have looked at that picture and thought, yeah, there are some things that I can see are more like me, some things that I can feel are less like me. What about this one? More like me or more like us, less like me, less like us? Warning on the next one, it's a bit confronting. More like us or less like us? But what if I do this? More like us or less like us? Now, I've done this exercise many times before. I must say students, young people are very astute because they often point out the creepy guy in the background there staring. And I've done this several times, but the one thing that I end with is that every single one of those photos was taken in the same country. Every single one of those photos was taken in Egypt. Every single one of those photos represents people of demographically the same community. Yeah? Whether they're a woman dressed in a full niqab at the beach, a girl dressed in a bikini at the beach. And these are quite popular in Egypt, these window dressing of the sexy underwear. But the point I want to make about this, the reason that I show these pictures is often that our assumptions about what is less like us, what is more than us, come down to those kinds of materialistic physical attributes, what somebody is wearing, what they're looking at, what activities are they partaking in. And that can also affect how we provide services to those people, where we refer those people to as community service providers as well, and generally how we structure our service provision to people as well. But the important thing to understand is all of those kind of demographic, visible kinds of signs are really only the tip of an iceberg. And if belonging is an essential part of identity, then most of that happens below the surface. Most of that happens below that tip of the iceberg, and is an intensely personal phenomenon, an intensely personal process that we need to delve further into if we're going to be building that capacity, if we are going to be facilitators for belonging and social inclusion, and ultimately contribute to a more robust, socially cohesive society. And in my time, I've worked a lot with young people who have struggled to belong. And I'm sure it's not an alien concept to many of the people here. Those teenage and early years struggles of those questions of where do I belong. In my own life, feeling a lack of a sense of belonging in Australia, primarily because people kept telling me, you're part of that community, led me at the age of 18 to return to the country of my birth and seek belonging there. And when I went back to Egypt, I found that I didn't belong there either, because I was more Australian than Egyptian. Right? And all the expectations that people had on me because of how I looked weren't the expectations that I had of myself and of my own identity. So I found this sense of belonging that I was searching for wasn't where I thought I might find it, which was in Egypt, where I thought there might be more people who might accept me as more like me, more like us, and less like them. But I've worked a lot with young people who are going through these issues of belonging, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of those issues, because we talk a lot about issues like radicalization and extremism, but at the heart of radicalization and extremism is this sense of belonging. Right? I think it's on your program that belonging is an essential human need. Everybody seeks to belong. And that's a good thing. Okay? But there is also a danger when people seek to belong if we can't help them to belong in ways that make positive contributions to their civic participation, if we can't help them to belong in ways that develop their trust and develop their willingness to cooperate, all of those things that I talked about in the beginning, if we can't help them to develop a sense of belonging that makes them part of a social group rather than imposing on them a social grouping, then we risk, young people in particular, but people of all ages, I've worked with people of all ages, looking for belonging in places and among groups that have negative impacts on their own well-being and on societal well-being. The place or the space that I've worked at the most is when young people and people of other mature age as well become involved in and find a sense of belonging among extremist groups and extremist organisations. And in the work I've done, I've looked at three dynamics here. Broader theme, intergroup relations and emotions of people who become involved in extremist groups. And at the emotional level, there's what we call ANCODI, anger, contempt and disgust. So when people find that there is no sense of belonging in the broader society, they retreat into us versus them. Okay? That is how they get their sense of belonging. I am this and everyone else is different. It's us versus them. And extremist groups will exploit that. They will exploit that and create a sense of anger and injustice among those people who are searching for belonging. That anger may also be met with contempt, a feeling of superiority and inferiority. Well, my group is better than that group. The group that I belong to is better than that group. We're superior, we're morally superior than that group. We're better than that group. And disgust. Disgust is what I call the cockroach syndrome, right? So when you squish a cockroach, okay, you don't squish it because you're angry at it. Okay, you don't say, "Damn you, cockroach." Okay, you don't squish a cockroach because you're angry at it. You don't squish a cockroach because you feel you're better than the cockroach. You squish a cockroach because you're disgusted by it. You're intolerant of it. Yeah, and these negative group dynamics and negative senses of belonging develop a sense of intolerance in the individual. They become intolerant of the out group of them. And you'll see this when people start calling other people vermin, cockroaches, okay? They have that sense of disgust of the other. And in fact, the research that I was doing shows that disgust becomes then the essential ingredient towards violence, right? You don't really carry out acts of violence unless there's an element of disgust in there. At the intergroup level, there's in-group favoritism, which is my group is better, same as at the emotional level of contempt. Out-group derogation. That group is responsible for everything, every ill in the world. It's their fault. And it's their fault that I'm in the position that I'm in. Because they're coming here and taking all the jobs, or else they're standing in the dole queues and taking all the dole money. Not quite sure how that works, but for some people it makes sense, but I don't know. So in-group favoritism, out-group derogation, and again, moral superiority. I get these emails all the time. I've paid my taxes all my life, and you don't deserve to be in Parliament. Leave our country, you horrible person. Okay? As if somehow paying your taxes makes you morally superior. Right? Never mind that I've paid taxes all my life too. So, and then at the broader level, at the more social level, we have these themes of survival and preservation. Our group is under attack, people. They want to get rid of us. There's a conspiracy out there to get rid of us all, so we need to fight. Okay, we are victims, that's victimhood, and it's their fault, that's blaming the other. And so it's okay if we fight or if we hate or if we say bad things about them. It's okay, it's our right to free speech, to say all of these stuff about them, because we're the victims, they're the problem, and we need to fight for our survival. That's what happens when there's a void in people's lives. That's what happens, and I've seen it time and time again. Youngest person I've ever worked with is 13 years old. 13 years old. And at the age of 14, he was charged with terrorism offences. He is now in jail, and he's 15. 13 years old. Oldest person I worked with was 55, also jailed for terrorism offences. This can happen through periods of vulnerability in somebody's life, whether it's teenage. In the case of the older gentleman that I worked with, he was an alcoholic going through his third divorce and sought a sense of belonging and found it in an extremist group. And led him down a path of self-destruction, but also a dangerous path of violence as well. So we know what happens when there's a lack of belonging. We know what happens when social cohesion breaks down. We've seen this. I mean, if you look at the political landscape today, I don't know how many phone calls I've made where people said to me, pox on both your houses, you're all mugs, right? This lack of trust in those institutions that govern us. Okay, how do we get that back? How do we develop that trust again? How do we and how do we maintain against further breakdown of social cohesion, further breakdown of that glue between individuals and each other, and then individuals and those institutions that govern them. I've worked in countries where governance has completely broken down. I've travelled through Pakistan in armoured vehicles through the ungoverned areas, dressed like this and talking about democracy. Talk about target on your head. And I've seen what happens when a society breaks down, when social cohesion breaks down. When social cohesion breaks down and people do not have a sense of belonging, when people do not feel included, okay, when those bonds of trust break down, when people start looking for belonging in negative and adverse ways, when people are resisting the social grouping that is imposed on them and start actively searching for social group, okay, this can happen. Okay. And they become some of the most vulnerable environments for radicalization, violence, civil war, all of those kinds of things, and generally a breakdown of community and a breakdown of society and detrimental to societal and individual well-being. So what can we do? Where do we go? Okay. Oh, no, that's not right. Oh, there's a slide missing. Oh, there's a slide missing. Okay, well, there's a slide missing, so I'll just talk to the slide that I have here. Okay. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, I've got a little slide here that's not showing up there, so I'll just talk to it. The first thing that we need to do is avoid this subject positioning. Okay, let people belong. Let people belong. Create the spaces for them to belong. Create the opportunities for them to belong. I will tell you, personally, as a woman of Arab background and of Muslim faith, that every time I pick up a newspaper, I'm told what I am. And it's not nice. It's not pretty. And I think that there are many people here who can relate to that, okay? Whether you're a mature Australian, okay, or whether you're a young Australian, okay? The media likes to use shorthand for categorizing you in different ways, for putting you in social groupings and boxes in ways that may not resonate with you, with who you are and how you see yourself. When I was doing my PhD, I did a focus group with young Muslim men, and I was telling you, these were bro types. Like, they moonwalked into the room, they had their pants down here, they had their caps on backwards, and they wore their masculinity like a veil. Started talking to them about what it means to be Australian, what it means to belong in Australia. And the toughest one there broke down and started crying. And he said, I used to know that I belonged. I used to know in my heart that I was Australian. But now I'm constantly told that I'm not. I'm constantly told that I'm something else. I'm constantly told that I don't belong. And as he wiped away his tears, he said, and I just don't know what to do. I don't know where I fit in anymore. And I'm sure that many of us in this room have had experiences like that, whether your own personal experience or you've come across that kind of experience as well. So we really need to avoid this subject positioning, recognizing that for so many of us, our social grouping is determined by others, and that takes away our agency to belong, our agency to choose our own social group, to create our own social groups, and to participate fully in our own way. The second thing I've got here is inspire and empower citizens to act. Provide platforms for the act of belonging. And Kate, I know that you talked about co-location around neighbourhood centres. And I think they're brilliant. I mean, in fact, I'm working currently to develop one in Wanneroo using a school site. Because when you think about it, schools are communities. The school classrooms are used till 3 o'clock, and then what? Okay, so let's open up our school communities. Let's use our school communities to inspire and empower citizens to act. Let's create spaces for them to inspire them to act and platforms for the act of belonging. So I'm working at the moment with a school in Wanneroo where we're looking at using the classrooms out of school hours to bring in speech therapists and occupational therapists from the local university, the university close by, ECU, and create another sense of belonging, create more senses of belonging, create more opportunities for belonging by providing services. And that's a really important way of creating belonging, okay, is bringing people together in places where they already are, okay. They already go to school. It's like you said, the single parent, which I was, drops off the kid at school. You're there already. So, you know, give them an opportunity to belong, give them an opportunity to act, give them an opportunity to access services and partake in in civil society where they are already at. The third one here is I've got reinforce weak attachments. Reinforce weak attachments. Right? So many of the young people I've worked with have gone down that path through having weak attachments to family and weak attachments to community. Okay? One of the things that we lack from an understanding of, and particularly one of the reasons why I moved my career and changed my career was to try and create that understanding and develop that understanding, is that societal ties and societal bonds need to be strengthened in order to strengthen individual well-being. In order to create belonging, in order to feel that you belong, you have to have those strong ties. And in situations where those ties are weakened, people are more likely to search for belonging in places that aren't good for them. So we need to reinforce those weak attachments, develop ways of creating stronger attachment. I don't have much time, but I'll give you a quick example of a young person that I worked with. This is a young fellow who went overseas to fight. Well, he went overseas. We don't know if he's fighting, but he certainly has some affiliations in Syria that led him there. Aussie born and bred. His parents were very, I guess, liberal in the way that they raised their kids. So his sister is actually a born-again Christian, and he converted to Islam and then travelled to Syria. His mother rang me, and I flew to Sydney to meet with her, and she met with me, and we spent 2 hours just with her in tears. It was actually a very, very devastating meeting to hear this mother talk. And she was talking about how, you know, everyone was saying to her, just cut the ties. There's nothing you can do. Cut the ties with your son. You know, it's causing you so much pain. It's causing your family so much pain. She was telling me about her husband, how her husband had had enough. He didn't even want to talk to him anymore, you know. And I said to her, the one thing that I can, the most important piece of advice I can give you is do not cut those ties. You are the one thing that is the remaining attachment between him and the society that he left behind. Okay, you are the one lifeline that can bring him back into community. So I worked up a plan with her about how she would contact him more often. And I said to her, when you talk to him, don't talk to him about when are you coming home, why are you still there, why don't you come home. Talk to him about all the things that he's missing at home. Talk to him about, oh, your sister went out and did this, and oh, we're going to this, and you know, oh, we saw your Aunt Mavis the other day and she's doing well and she sends her love. Oh, you should see Uncle Benny came to a family function and you should have seen him. You know, he hasn't changed one bit. He's still telling those awful jokes. Remind him of what he left behind. Reinforce that weak attachment. Bring him back through those attachments. And so when we see people who have been detached from their belonging group for whatever reasons, one of the most important things that we can do is help them to reattach either to that belonging group or to other belonging groups. Create those opportunities for them. And the last point I want to make here is that the most important thing as well is that we need to recognize that the tools of change are not in the hands of government. The tools of change are in your hands. Government and bureaucracies are encumbered by a lot of challenges. Among them, they are not there at the grassroots in the way that you are. Okay? The best thing that a government can do is empower community. Empower community organisations. Empower you. Whether that's by funding, whether that's by other forms and means, but the most important thing is that governments need to start recognising the value of our community sector. I remember once I applied for a grant to do something with my NGO, and we were a charity, so the grant money would only go to hiring people to do some of the work. But I was a professor, so I was doing it all pro bono. And I remember ringing up the funding body and saying, you want to give me $40,000 to develop a professional mentoring program for young people at risk of radicalisation. And $40,000 is about half of what you pay your lowest paid public servant. And you want me to do that. And on top of that, you want me to provide you with all of this information. You want me to tick all of these boxes. You want me to go through this cumbersome grants process. You want me to do all of this. You want me to do it. And you only want to pay me $40,000 for it. What they give to community organisations literally is half of what they pay their lowest paid public servant. I know because I used to be a public servant. Right? So there needs to be a fundamental change in the way that government empowers a strong civil society sector, and that begins by recognising the level of skill, the level of expertise, the level of experience, the immeasurable, intangible value that your sector brings to the work that you do. And recognise that through providing you with the level of funding. I know a lot of community organisations run on the smell of an oily rag. I certainly ran mine on the smell of an oily rag. I visited family community centres. I know that you run on the smell of an oily rag. And you do amazing things that government could never do with that oily rag. Okay? So there needs to be a fundamental shift in how we view community organisations as professional, and the professionalism that exists within that sector if we are to build a robust and effective community sector. And if we are to go back to all of those things I started with, if we are to ensure that we have a socially cohesive society where people belong, where people feel included, and where people are not vulnerable to those negative forces that undermine what we could be as a country. Thank you very much. Oh, over to you. can if you want to. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.